In the aftermath of World War II, the United States used several substances to create a lethal arsenal of biochemical weapons to use against the communists. The infamous Edgewood arsenal of Chesapeake Bay became the household of American scientists who firmly believed that using chemicals during conflicts was more humane than using bullets and artillery. Throughout the Cold War, military doctors tested the effects of LSD, nerve gas, and other drugs on more than 5,000 soldiers to study the impact on their brains, bodies, and conduct. The results were disturbing, resulting in depression, lassitude, brain trauma, and even casualties. The operation was called Delirium, and the experiments finally ended with the American withdrawal from Vietnam. A new kind of warfare. Scientists innovated with different kinds of warfare that had not yet appeared on the battlefields during World War I. However, the threat that struck the most fear into soldiers' hearts was the use of chemical agents that could end a man's life upon immediate contact. Chemical warfare was used for the first time during the Battle of Ypres in 1914, and as the war raged on, more chemical agents such as liquid chlorine and mustard gas appeared. The Edgewood Arsenal of Chesapeake Bay, Maryland, was built as a direct response to chemical warfare in Europe. The U.S. Army launched a unique program to study chemicals at Edgewood, and military doctors began conducting tests on soldiers inside gas chambers to study the reaction. As World War II broke out, all significant armies invested in researching poison gases during combat. President Roosevelt also took action when word got out that the Third Reich was working on chemical agents that were far more lethal than mustard or chlorine. In 1941, he appointed pharmacologist Alfred Richards to coordinate war medical research and conduct tests on soldiers. In a letter to the Army, Richards wrote, quote, "In the study of vesicant gases, investigators are confronted by one major obstacle, namely that the skin of man is so different anatomically from that of laboratory animals that the latter are relatively useless as subjects for experimentation." All the wartime tests took place at Edgewood. Still, most of the volunteers were fooled about the intention of the trials and were never warned of the possible side effects. By the time the war ended, the Chemical Corps Medical Division had issued a commendation to the test subjects for subjecting themselves to possible injuries to protect the armed forces. German and Japanese scientists who had developed new chemical agents during the conflict were then transferred to the U.S. to help the Americans build their own chemical program. The Soviets did the same. In 1949, the director of Edgewood Arsenal, Wilson Green, wrote a report titled Psychochemical Warfare, a New Concept of War. It called for new chemicals that could have the same side effects of nerve gas, but without its lethality. According to a report by Rafi Kachadurian from The New Yorker, Green wrote, quote, "Throughout recorded history, wars have been characterized by death, human misery, and the destruction of property, each major conflict being more catastrophic than the one preceding it. I'm convinced that it is possible, by means of the techniques of psychochemical warfare, to conquer an enemy without the wholesale killing of his people or the mass destruction of his property." Green firmly believed that chemicals could incapacitate or end the enemy while keeping infrastructure intact, and the Army's Chemical Warfare Service liked the new concept. Green later specified, quote, "The symptoms which are considered to be of value in strategic and tactical operations include the following: fits or seizures, dizziness, fear, panic, hysteria, hallucinations, migraine, delirium, extreme depression, notions of hopelessness, lack of initiative to do even simple things, and suicidal mania." After getting clearance from the Army to begin recruiting volunteers, the Experimental Medical Research Volunteer Program, or Operation Delirium, was born. Operation Delirium. The paranoia of Soviet military superiority during the rise of the Cold War in the 1950s pushed companies to provide Edgewood with hundreds of chemicals to test. Captain Jim Ketchum, a young and successful psychiatrist, became the pillar of the program when he joined in 1960. In his memoir, Ketchum recalled the dark halls and the rooms where delirious soldiers were tested with all sorts of chemicals. There were also signs that read, quote, "What you see here, hear here. When you leave here, leave it here." Ketchum started working with a chemical known as EA-2277, a 3-quinucleedinyl benzylate, or BZ. This anticholinergic, similar to atropine or scopolamine, could provoke delirium and other mental disorders. Ketchum became instantly fascinated with the vivid illusions that the soldiers experienced. For instance, a man could see people and animals appear and disappear. They could feel they were eating a delicious dessert when they were actually licking a shoe or drinking a soda. Soldiers also exhibited strange symptoms, such as rapid mumbling, illusions, or a peculiar obsession with everyday objects. Other men also saw the clinic's guards as giant worms, snakes, and other animals that threatened to attack them. On one occasion, a drugged soldier tore apart one of the padded cells in which he was held and tried to run off because he thought the guards would put him down. The drug's effects often lasted for days, and once they wore off, the soldiers only remembered fragments of what they'd initially experienced, struggling to distinguish what was real from what was fantasy, and suffering from anxiety, aggression, and terror. After recovering, one soldier remembered, quote, "I had a great urge to smoke, and when I thought about it, a lit cigarette appeared in my hand. I could actually smoke the cigarette." Other soldiers were tested with LSD, a potent hallucinogenic drug, often without knowing it. The New Yorker article from Cachadorian gathered the testimony of one soldier who said, quote, "They asked me to stick my head into a culvert-type thing, and they sprayed some kind of mist into my face, and I thought it was water. I had no idea what it was." The soldier was then asked to do fundamental mathematics problems, but failed because he thought the pencil had turned to rubber. Another soldier fell into depression, and when interviewed by the doctors, he said, quote, "Because I feel like my life is not worth a nickel here anyway. I think I would rather go back to Massachusetts, back to my home unit." Some of these tests were filmed and compiled in a series of films directed by Jim Ketchum. Two of them were titled The Longest Weekend and Cloud of Confusion, and sought to demonstrate how BZ could incapacitate an entire unit under combat. The films were part of Operation Dork, a high-quality experiment to show the military the potential behind using gases during the Cold War. Consequences. The tests proved to be an ethical problem for the personnel that worked at Edgewood. The Nuremberg Code established that, quote, "The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential." Others, like Ketchum, believed that it was for the greater good, but many doctors left Edgewood and never came back. Although most soldiers volunteered for the experiments, the Army never specified that they would be used like laboratory rats. Instead, they were often told they would test special equipment and were offered extra pay, additional days off, or commendations. More importantly, the volunteers were offered time away from Vietnam. Still, once they arrived at Edgewood and realized what was going on, it was too late to back off, and the ones who tried were threatened with a court-martial. Moreover, the test subjects were released into civilian life as if nothing had happened to them, with many of them perishing soon after. Operation Delirium ran for more than a decade, but the test results were never used during the Vietnam War. In 1969, President Nixon said that the U.S. would not use the 49 tons of BZ that it had stockpiled since Operation Delirium began in the early 1960s. Ketchum then left the chemical warfare program in 1971 after the funds stalled. Years later, outraged legislators and the Army seized Edgewood to study the facility's true purpose and how much the CIA was involved in the project. Thank you for watching our video. Please like and subscribe to our Dark Documentaries channels to find more exciting historical content. And let us know in the comments below what you think of these secret tests that were run by the United States during the Cold War.